And then I stumbled across Dan Palmer's podcast, Making Permaculture Stronger, just by searching the category, really, permaculture podcasts. And it was early on. He'd only made a few episodes at the time. And so I just started listening, and I was blown away. This was totally activating me on so many levels. It re-sparked a lot. And the subjects and conversations were just like, wow, this is amazing. Oh, this makes me think of this. Oh, this is really cool. And what if this and what if that? So I got a notepad, sat it on one of the pieces of furniture there, and I'd be painting. And every couple strokes, listening to the podcast, I'd be, I'd write down, that gives me a new idea. I want to inquire about this. And so that led to a bit of correspondence with Dan, and he was really responsive and engaged with what I was bringing. And I was really engaged with what he was bringing out. So, that's kind of the early beginnings of my involvement with that project and with Dan. So Dan was really inspired by Christopher Alexander's actually later life work, the Nature of Order books, as well as the pattern language and the other stuff as well. But the Nature of Order was kind of took it to a deeper level. And this idea of, if there is living process, that which creates all that comes to be, how can we have more agency and consciousness in our design with living process? And so Dan had been developing that for years in the background, and working with James Andrews as well, just ideating, trying things out, picking up new ideas all the time. And in the meantime, Dan was also running his development of holistic management, which he was trying to adapt it for the every person's use off the farm as holistic decision making. And so some of the communities that Dan held were around these ideas, and so I partook in a holistic decision making class, and he ran dozens and dozens of those online and offline and on the ground. But then he had yet to do a living design. He'd done some living design process workshops, but in person, maybe an online one, but then was saying, okay, well, he was developing this idea of a 8 to 10 week online because of COVID. I mean, I think they would have done it in person at the same time as well, but a living design process focused class. And so I was one of the first signups, because it was just totally, it was a lot of stuff that I was really into. So there ended up being, I think, about 15 people in the course, and that was in midsummer of, if I'm getting it right, or maybe it was spring of 2021. Really, I mean, we're talking about aliveness and living transformation, and it doesn't really follow a formula or a set of steps or anything, right? So, but if we look at how growth and transformation happen, it has certain characteristics. And if we start to also examine the way modernity goes about conceiving of how things are made, it's kind of like on a continuum. It's kind of, they're quite disparate, right? And so the point of inspiration is living transformation or living creation. And part of the premise is to notice that oftentimes our creative processes tend to default unconsciously to the status quo, or to the way of thinking in modernity, this kind of mechanistic parts thinking. And so to find some balance and to be able to find ways to connect with the whole. And it's paradoxical, right? Because we can't know the whole. We can't know everything about everything, but there are ways to connect to it. And I think what Dan was picking up on and working on was premised on the fact that permaculture tends to deviate or default to this sort of mechanistic assembly mindset unconsciously, and that, and also the very functional, it tends to focus on the functional relationship of things, whereas things come to be through creative transformation. Like your hand, you don't put some bone, you don't snap bones together and then put some muscles on it and then put the skin around it and call it a hand, right? Like it's the living transformative process is a growth type process. And so, what you alluded to earlier about taking a sequential approach, and it's not a 5 steps approach, these are the steps, but it's kind of like what is something thoughtful and feelingful that could be done that initiates the process, and how and when those changes are being slowly realized, can you feel into what that is doing, that is creating the change, and how do we navigate that? How do we paddle those waters? And I think what living design process with the idea of it is that it's a means to navigate those waters in a way that is not just making things up as you go along. It actually has ways to connect, or methodologies that support the idea of connecting to the whole. Yeah. The idea is that there is a difference. I was talking about this earlier, between how life creates itself and how humans in modernity tend to create things. So that's part of the premise. And what is seen in the green highlight here is how the rest of life creates itself in comparison to modern ways of, say, building by assembly. And these can function as they could function like principles for growth and transformation. So, for example, what and how it unfolds is shaped by what is going on inside the situation and context. So, just like permaculture principles are generative, you could take one out at any time and just say, what does that mean to this? Or what is this if I ask it as a question? These two are generative, can be used like principles in a generative sort of way.
Yeah, decisions emerge from within the process, and there is no, quote, plan. And one of the other ones I'm reading here that I really resonate with is remain deeply rooted in feeling for and presence of the whole.
Yeah, I mean, I'm working a lot on smaller sites, and some of them are larger than others, but a lot of suburban and urban stuff. So the scale is way more manageable for some of these techniques. And, like I said, they're useful to a living design process, but they're not the thing itself. But I do use them a lot. The photo I was trying to show you was a client I'm working with, and she bought a house. It came with a pool. She didn't want the pool. She was interested in naturalizing it at some point. But the first thing that really bugged her about the place was it was all fake grass all the way around the pool, fence to fence to fence. And it was so hot. And so when we spent some time out there, that was just one of the hugest tensions that she had about the place. And so that was one of the first things that we wanted to address. And so in this living process, we thought, well, we got to do something about that right away. And so in moving toward that, we knew that we were going to roll up the fake grass. We found out there was 12 inches of tamped crushed limestone underneath that, which is, a bit of excavation work. And so we didn't want to take out the whole thing because we thought it was a fine substrate for where we wanted paths anyways. So kind of working through this process of dropping in and attuning to what's there and catching a glimpse of what a next best step might be. We kind of started to move into that. And my client had a practice of yoga where she runs through her yard, and she wanted a little bit of challenge to it. And so I had these little colored sticks, and I said, okay, well, let's see your running routine. And she'd run, and I dropped sticks behind her path, and I said, okay, run the other way. And she really got into it. And then I was saying, oh, that's where you run this way, and that way, when you go that way. And that's how some of the paths started to take form. And then we also looked about the backyard, as small as it was, and did kind of a feelings map about how the way that different parts felt. Some parts felt more private, some parts felt more exposed, some parts felt hotter and cooler. And so using the sticks and ropes, that kind of helped us to discern the natural organs of the yard that were there, but not obvious because it was just a wall of plastic grass and pool or a carpet of. And that's how the design process started. And so then we began to excavate what wasn't going to be paths, and knowing that we could push or pull anything, in terms of the shape of it. And then looking at what was remaining that wasn't path became, you kind of do this flip between positive and negative space. You're thinking about paths, and then you flip it and go, okay, now what remains is a garden, and you're looking at the positive space of that, and what does that mean, and what are some of the characteristics of these different potential garden spaces. So yeah, so this framework, it could be read as linear, like you drop in and you attune and you catch a glimpse of what's possible, and you figure it all out, and then poof, at the bottom you have a really cool picture with lots of details and all the plants you want to plant. But I think that would be a misunderstanding of this. Really, what it's intended to do is be something that can happen kind of over and over again. And like you said, the torus field, right? The idea that you could kind of move through this at many levels repeatedly and up and down. And that to develop something creatively, or to create something, would be to actually make small changes, and then, like slow and small, right? So to really drop into the situation holistically, not just, with your clipboard and your measuring tape and your soil samples, right? But really just like feel into the space, let some sort of resonance rise with you, or something comes up, and not try to solve it like it's a problem, or come to an answer. Be patient. And often it's actually when, people say, if you're having trouble, if you're stuck at work, take a little break, and then all of a sudden you go, aha, I know what to do, right? So that's usually when some sort of glimmer of potential comes up. And it might be nothing, right? It might be totally nothing. It might have you think about something differently. And maybe you decide against it, and you just decide now, in this new context of deciding against that you're going to drop back into the hole and see it in a different way, right? Do you see how you can move up and down this process? And it could be happening within the so-called designer, or so-called or the activator of the change. It could be happening with your so-called client or customers. It could be happening with your team, and it could be happening at many different levels, right? So part of what we learned in the LDP living design process course was to explore what are some ways that we can focus on these different 5 points in the middle, because they really are focal points. They're not really steps. They're where you can put your attention. Yeah, I think the word designer becomes really suspect in a process like this, because the lines are very, very blurred. The boundaries get really fuzzy, because really what you're trying to do is blur the lines between designer, builder, customer, client, user. I think basically everybody is a designer at that point, or design is happening. And I think the work of somebody who's interested in the idea of LDP, or living design process, is someone who's working to create or hold space for those things to happen, and whatever means by which you choose to do that, or ways that you find useful, work. But they can't be formulaic. They don't work. I mean, if you start doing it as a formula, it kind of it becomes the thing it becomes not the thing that you thought you were working on. Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't think anything's off the table. It's not like, oh, this should replace permaculture, replace some sort of analysis. But I think the idea is that the analysis is something that emerges. Is it important to do a form of analysis now? For what reason and what intent? And let's focus on that. What's the pH of the soil? Sure, let's get into that, right? But not to do it presumptively, like to say that we need all the layers of information to know everything before we can make any decisions. One of the things that we did is we went out with parents and kids out into a farm field that was being developed as a food forest, and it was in the early stages. And but we pretended that we had just crashed our alien spaceship, and that the kids were to put on their spacesuits and go out with their parents. And I said, in this world, the kids are the adults, and the adults are the kids. So so the parents had to be their note takers, or something like that. I made it so that the parents had to be the to assist the kids, and the kids were to go out like aliens and experience this place like they've never seen it before. And so it allowed them to kind of pretend that they had fresh eyes, and play that role, and just go out and say, wow, look at these weird apples, and like really see the place phenomenologically. And I also mentioned that the aliens have really weird bodies, and they have a feeling body, and an emotional body, and a thinking body, and a sensing body. And so they were to use their different bodies to see the world. And so when we got back, I said, oh, wow, what did you find? And so I got to hear what their thinking body thought, and what their feeling body felt, and what their sensing body sensed, and what their emotional body, what emotions they had. And we could create kind of a more of a holistic map of what they experienced in this place.
This is my experience as a teacher, a couple of thousand people over 30 some years. Everyone is moved by this. Virtually everyone is moved, and many, many, many people, maybe even the majority, have a life-transforming experience when they encounter it. It's like there's no going back. There is no going back. It's like you went right through the looking glass.